Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining, and welcome to Rumination with Andrew, another live show. And today we are going to look at BRICS versus the West. What should Jamaica and the Caribbean do? Now, welcome to another live session. Mr. Corbin, that's Fred Corbin of Barbados, is unfortunately not able to be with us this afternoon due to technical difficulties. So he has expressed his apologies for not being able to make it on our live program, on our live show today. So I'm going to be by myself, and I hope that you'll aid me in conducting this very interesting topic and this what plans to be a very interesting show. Now, we have been hearing a lot about the BRICS and what BRICS is about. And, people think that it is the alternative to the Western economic foundation that we are seeing in the world now. In the Western world, we have the system of, debt-ridden economies, if you will, and austerity. We know we have the IMF, for those of you who are aware of the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, and the World Bank, we have the OAS, and we have lots of other multinational organizations. And we live essentially in a debt-ridden world, a world, particularly in the West, in which the United States and the Western world, they want to ensure that we remain in debt perpetually. I'm sure you will agree with me on that. Now, that is how the world is, and that is how, to a great extent, they control us by keeping us in debt and indebted. And many of us need to educate ourselves in how we are going to extricate ourselves out of the system, out of this debt trap, if you will. Now, many countries, including Jamaica, Barbados, I know of, are in a very stringent and austere IMF program. And many of these countries are suffering. Now, we hear different rhetorics, we hear different narratives coming from our leaders, coming from, from the prime ministers and the presidents of our countries. So you'll hear from Jamaica, for example, that the IMF program has been very instrumental in helping us to pay down and to pay, on our debt. And we have all of this national reserves, right? And essentially, we are saving up all of this money while the people are suffering. And that is some of the things that is quite ironic, quite, interesting, quite contradictory when we see the level of the enormous levels of poverty in countries like Jamaica. Yet still they're telling us that they have all of these, reserves, right? That they're saving. And I see lots of videos, YouTube videos on Jamaica suggesting that the reserves, the foreign reserves, we have billions of dollars in foreign reserves. But why do we keep that money at the expense of helping our people to form businesses and to build and to expand on our economy? Why is it that we just have to pay down debt? And after debt, what? What is the question? What is the future of Jamaica after it has finished paying down its debt? That is what we need to understand. And we are not hearing any real answers, any veritable responses coming from the government. All we're hearing is that, yes, we have to pay down our debt. And after we've paid down our debt, then we are going to go through a rosy economy, and then we can build on what we have. But the BRICS that we are talking about, which were essentially first, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. These were the countries that initially formed what we call now as the BRICS nation. Now, it's interesting to note that we live in a world where people look at the world through lens, either it's left or right, or it's black or white, or it is right or it is not right, right? This is a sort of simplistic world in which most of us live in, right? We don't look at the world and say the world is a textured, nuanced one where nothing is necessarily good, or bad. Well, we have good and bad, but we can't say that one institution is holistically good and the other is holistically bad, can we? Now, that is a sort of impression that we're getting from BRICS, that BRICS is the alternative to the financial debt trap that we find that most Caribbean countries, including Jamaica and around the world, find themselves in. In fact, in recent times, I'm hearing that Great Britain is now about to join the BRICS, not the BRICS. They are the IMF is about to enter into an austerity program with Great Britain. Now you'd be wondering, how is it that Great Britain is a part of the West? Why are they in this debt trap? Now, many people are suggesting that the United States, remember now we said last week that Henry Kissinger, a former Secretary of State, he said that it is dangerous to be an enemy of the United States, but it is fatal to be a friend. To be a friend of the United States is fatal. In other words, the United States does not have any friends. She doesn't have any real friends. What she has are interests. So when we divide the world up into West and East and we say blacks and white, the United States, though it might treat its European allies a little bit more better than they would treat, Africa, the African continent, the Asian continent, but in the final analysis, they don't necessarily mean them well also. And we can look at what happened during the Russian oil pipeline, right? Remember now that there was a Russian oil pipeline and the Russians were actually selling oil at a cheaper rate, at a cheaper cost to the Europeans. And what happened is that the United States, it's clear now, seemed to have blown up that pipeline, right? And you had that the Russians had now to buy oil on the American market at a higher cost, which is helping to cripple their economy. And this is something that we have to look at, that, even though we think we are living in sovereign states and we have all of this autonomy, we don't. We don't have all these autonomy, including Europe. And that is what we have to understand. In fact, I was reading in the Gleaner. Are you hearing me? Can you hear me, everyone? Let me hear if you're hearing me. Could you tell me in the box if you're hearing me loud and clearly? Okay. Well, yeah, I was reading in the Gleaner, and this is an article that was published on September 13th, 2025. So it's recent. And the article here is titled, Trump calls on all NATO countries to stop buying Russian oil, threatens up to 100% tariffs on China. Okay? So what it's suggesting, it is telling Europeans, it's telling even China, which is a global power, and some of the European countries, that they are not allowed to buy Russian oil. And if they do that, according to him, he's going to increase the tariffs that they have to pay. Now, so much to sovereignty, so much to autonomy, so much to, we can do, we're our own, we can run our own show and we can do whatever we want to do. We can engage in whatever economic treaty we want to be engaged in. That is not holistically true, whether it's be for Jamaica or it's for Trinidad or it is for Guyana. All right. We a lot of times have to do the biddings of the United States. I was my interest was speak the other day, and I was disturbed, I must say, perturbed that, Kamala Persson-Caesar, she is the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. And, when the United States actually blew up the ship there in the Caribbean, the Southern Caribbean waters, allegedly saying that they were drug traffickers on the boat, and therefore the boat had, to be blown up and killing 11 people there on board. Now, what Kamala was saying, yes, she was happy that the United States could have apprehended these people, could have blown them up, and could have killed them in the most brutal and violent way. Now, the fact of the matter is that she understands, Kamala Persson-Caesar understands, that she has to side with the U.S. Because even though she understands, if she, I'm sure, and she has all the experience, she's hopefully this will be on forever. Wow, this is something else, right? So sorry about that with this internet problem. I'm not sure if it is, we're back together. Yeah, well, Kamala Caesar was suggesting she understood that if she had opposed U.S. policies, that could result in toppling of her government. This thing is not working well. Right. So that would be the toppling of her government, right? And she, decided that she would go along with what the United States is suggesting. So when we see here Trump actually threatening the European countries, letting them know that if they buy Russian oil, that the tariffs will be increased, then we in the Caribbean have to understand that the warships that are here are also not just about Venezuela, but it's about cementing US's hegemony in the region. That is what we have to understand. There's clear evidence right now to let us know that we cannot oppose that the United States is cementing her understanding, her hegemonic power in the Caribbean, in Latin America, that she does not want any other global power to mess around and to control what is happening here in the region. Right? So this is what is happening. This is the war that we're seeing here. It's not just about Venezuela. It's not just about Nicolas Maduro. It doesn't just have to do with the war on drugs. It has to do with political, economic, and military control. And we saw when Trump came into office what happened in Panama and the Panama Canal. And, before he came into office and he was making all these threats, and the Panamanian government was suggesting that they are a sovereign state and they can do whatever they want to do and they can keep the Chinese and have the Chinese invest in the canal. However, Trump said no. And immediately when he came into office, the Panamanians had to change their song. They had to change the tune, understanding that the United States rules the world. Okay? Now, let us look carefully at this article that was written in the Trinidad and Guardian newspaper. And it says here, will Trump's tariff threats protect the dollar's dominance? BRICS nations plan to create rival to greenback bound to fail even without President-elect's measures. So in 2003, the leaders of Brazil and other BRICS countries at the time, China, India, Russia, and South Africa, discussed collaboration on a new shared currency. The Brazilian president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, has been a vocal proponent of an alternative to the US dollar, the dominant global currency for the past 75 years. And the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, publicly promoted the idea during the BRICS summit in October by brandishing a symbolic BRICS banknote. The bloc's new members, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, and the United Arab Emirates, would presumably also be included in the new joint currency. Now, the proposed challenge to the dollar has already drawn the ire of the United States President-elect, Donald Trump, who has threatened to impose punitive tariffs of 100% on countries that move away from the greenback. So here is Trump, even before he got into office. He was actually, threatening countries that if you decide to join BRICS, that we are going to be imposing tariffs upon you of more than 100%. So it should tell you, even before he entered office, that we could see a picture where he was taking us and the road that he was taking us down on, which suggests to us, which is very, very clear to us, that if we enter the BRICS, that we are going to have American-US challenges. There are going to be challenges. If we decide, if Jamaica, if Trinidad, if Barbados, any of these countries decide they are going to join the BRICS, that the United States is going to be opposing it. Now, as we can see with the likes of Maduro, they can send ships, because now we are in the era of gunboat diplomacy. You don't do what we say, then we are going to send the military in, right? So this is now diplomacy by force. Okay, you do what we tell you to do. And that is almost what we're seeing happening in Haiti. And we saw in Iraq, we've seen in Libya, and we've seen it in a host of other countries, including Iran, which there is going to eventually be a war on Iran as Iran decides not to toe the line with the US. Okay, so this is not about the wars, the excuses, the pretexts that they often give us about these wars, that these wars are about drug trafficking or to make America, great and safe and to create this world for freedom and democracy. Okay, this is often just a pretext and empty words. Mere empty words. These are not things that are going to help us to understand what they're doing. Now, BRICS summit, Lula criticizes U.S. military presence in the Caribbean. And this is in recent times that, Lula da Silva, the president of Brazil, is actually criticizing U.S.'s military presence in the Caribbean. So President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva criticized the U.S. military presence in the Caribbean during a virtual BRICS summit. The presence of armed forces from the world's largest power in the Caribbean Sea is a factor of tension incompatible with the region's vocation for peace, Lula said in his address at the meeting, which was convened by Brazil. Lula stressed that Latin America and the Caribbean have been a region of peace since the 1968 signing of the Treaty of Tlatelolco, which established a ban on the use of nuclear weapons in the region. Okay, so here he's saying that he's seeing that the United States understands that the people in the region, people in this region, in the Caribbean and also in Latin America, understand that the U.S. has always been trying to force upon us economic, military, political agendas that will not do our people well. And so what they do, if we don't agree with them, then they will send the military in the region. Okay. Now we're also hearing in Guyana that the United States, because Guyana now has sits on huge oil reserves, right? Isn't she sitting on huge oil reserves? And what we're seeing now that the United States is sending its Navy into Guyana, right? Sending its Navy into Guyana to protect the oil wells. But what it says, it's there because it doesn't want Venezuela to attack, right? It wants to protect the oil fields, right? And it wants to protect that Essequibo territory, All right, that is what it says that it's doing. But we have to read between the lines, right? We have to read between the lines. Yes, and everyone Clark was saying Jamaica should avoid. Let me highlight your thing here. Jamaica should avoid uh, business with superpower and choose middle power as partner. Countries like India, Brazil, Canada stay away from the USA and China at all costs. Now, can we, that is the question, can we stay away from them as global forces, as global powers? Maybe it's going to be very difficult to stay away from them, because even in India, let us look at India, for example, and we're talking about the BRICS nation, or the BRICS nations, I should say, because there are more than one. One of my problems coming out of the wicket, right, out of the bat, with BRICS nations is that if you look at the BRICS nations, you look at Brazil, you look at Russia, if you look at India, China, South Africa. What do we know about ¿Cómo estás? Puedo oh, it's right here. Oh, good. Oh, the live is here. I have to keep here. Okay, I have to do the live here, ladies and gentlemen. I have to do the live here. My internet was not working upstairs. Okay, can you hear me? Hello? Can you hear me, everybody? Okay, so welcome back to our live. And I was suggesting here that the Lula stressed that the Latin American and the Caribbean have been a region of peace since the 1968 signing of the Treaty of Tlatelolco, which established a ban on the use of nuclear weapons in the region. Right? So these are things that we're seeing happening in our society. And I'm not sure if you're seeing me well. The lighting here is bad. Oh, wow. But I will have to stay here until the lighting, until the internet gets better. Let me see if I can. La luz está la luz. ¿Puedo quedarme aquí? Sí, vamos a ver si es better here.
Sí, el comedor.
¿El comedor? Okay, sí.
Pero el internet.
Yeah, the internet is. Oh, it doesn't work there. Is there a room here? I wouldn't cuarto? Okay. All right. Yeah. See, thank you. Wow, it's still not very clear. Still not very clear. Okay. Can you see? Okay, right. Good. You can see me better. Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you. Let me see if I can do this. Yeah. Okay. Right. Not bad. Let me see if I can pull up my thing here. Sorry about that. The internet was horrible upstairs, and I think I look better here. Yeah. So thank you so much, and thank you for waiting on me. Yeah. So we are suggesting here. Let me read back what Everon Clark was saying. That we should avoid doing business with superpower and choose middle power as partner. Countries like India, Brazil, Canada stay away from the USA, and China at all costs. But can we stay away from the US? I don't think that is going to be possible, because the fact is that the US considers us at their backyard, and that is primarily what they did to Panama. Panama has the right diplomatically to allow China to invest in its canal, in the Panamanian Canal. However, the United States says, no, we're not going to allow it. So when we see that happening, and we're seeing that Panama is a bigger country to the likes of the Caribbean islands, to Jamaica, to Trinidad, to Barbados, and if they have to accede to US domination, then imagine. Now, think about the Caribbean islands being in the position of like a Nicolas Maduro. Look at what happened in Jamaica in 2010 when they wanted Dodos, right? The prime minister had to just accede, even though he suggested that they were actually not following Jamaica's protocol in terms of the arrest and the capture of Dodos, Christopher Dodos Coke, right? So Venezuela can continue in its warfare. I don't know how long it will last for, in terms of how long they will be able to resist US power, but Venezuela can do that because they have a military. And they're able to gather intelligence, and they're able to ward off the attacks of the United States at the moment. But how long are they going to last for? How long are they going to keep up that resistance for? That is something that is we need to ask ourselves. Now, you say that, yes, Everon Clark, you're saying that USA have so much problem. I don't think they would be concerned by Canada or Mexico investing in Jamaica, including Brazil. They do have a lot of problems, but let me say what they have problems with. They have problems with the overextension. That's a problem that they're having. The overextension of their military might. And that is a problem. And one of the signs that the United States empire is falling is that it is expanding itself too much. As a result of that, it is declining. However, the fact is that it is stepping up its aggression. It's military aggression. So the United States would behave as if it were democratic and they would go through diplomatic channels. But now they're saying that it's gunboat. You don't agree? Then we're going to send the ships in. And that is what we're seeing now happening in Venezuela. Now, they would not do that apart from Haiti. The United States would not operate like that in the Caribbean. For the most part, they would have a part, well, they did that to some extent in the 1970s, and they did that also in Cuba. So we have to understand that that took place there. However, when we look at the big picture, we must understand that the US is a global hegemon, right? That is what she is. She is a global hegemon. So global means that it controls the world, or it wants to control the world. So yes, the United States is looking at what Canada is doing. It's looking at what everything that Caribbean islands do, the US is looking at. Now look at Europe, look at the European market. Remember, I just read you the article in which Trump is suggesting that the European countries are not allowed to buy oil from Russia. That's what she's saying. And if they ever buy oil from Russia, they are going to impose over 100% tariffs on their goods going into the United States. Now, the United States is treating Russian countries like the way in which, not Russian countries, but European countries, and the way they're treating them. Can you imagine how they're going to treat Jamaica and the Caribbean? All right. So they're saying to us that if you go against our model, our economic model of the Washington consensus model, you are going to be in problem. Somebody's saying that Jamaica should adopt US dollar as the currency of or as our currency from the dollar right now. Well, that is going to be something interesting. I don't think that we have that sort of autonomy to do that. That would have to be if the United States desires to control us and to have us like a colony, as they had Puerto Rico, all right, and some of the U.S. Virgin Islands. If they adopt us as a colony, do we want to be a colony? Right now, Puerto Rico, even though they use the dollar, but they're having problems, and they have, of course, all rights to move on the continent, the U.S. continent, but they're not very happy with their status as being just a colony of the United States of America. Okay, so we have to look at that. The U.S. our accepting the U.S. dollar as the currency would not necessarily solve our problems. In fact, the U.S. dollar is very weak at the moment. The U.S. dollar is not doing well. And if you go to the United States now, you're going to see that many people are suffering, and many people find that the U.S. dollar is inflated, and they can't do with it what they used to do with it years ago. So we have to understand these things, and we have got to begin to look into what is happening on the global scene. And this is one of the reasons I started this channel, because oftentimes we tend to look at what is happening within our Caribbean region, but we don't understand that the global politics influence a lot of what is happening in our region, in our countries, or in our respective countries. Now, yesterday I also was sent a message by a person from Trinidad and Tobago who suggested to me that since the warships have been sent to the Caribbean waters, that the price of fish have gone up. The price of fish has gone up. So it means, therefore, that this is something very serious, because the fishermen, they are very scared. They don't want to go out and fish because, then they can be attacked, by a U.S., boat or plane, whatever, warship. Okay, so people are going to be very, very scared and frightened. So they remain where they are. And yes, if you have that and we don't have a lot of competition in the market, then the prices of fish are going to go up. Right? And that's what we're seeing right now. So these are things that we have to pay close attention to. Now, before I left, before the internet was interrupted, what I was suggesting too, when we look at BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, all of these countries have very deep racial tensions in their country. All of them. Brazil, if you go there, wonderful country, love the language, love to hear Brazilian Portuguese spoken. But you cannot ignore the fact that when you go there, what hits you is the stratification of races, colors in Brazil, right? Now, if we are trying to run away from neocolonialism and racism and all of that, How are we going to correct these problems with the BRICS? When Russia also is very anti-black. I've spoken to many black people who have been to Russia, and their experiences there have been horrific. And I'm not saying throughout Russia, right? I'm talking about the major city like, the capital of Russia. Um, but so I'm not here to suggest that every part of Russia is racist and they're going to kill you and all of that. But you must understand that they're not accustomed to people of color. Well, they do have a lot of people of color there in Russia because Russia is a massive country and its population is also diverse. However, when we look at what is happening in terms of the racial component, the way how they treat people of color, we don't think that they're going to treat us well because charity begins first at home, right? If you don't respect your citizens, the Brazilians don't respect their black people, then they're not going to respect black Trinidadians or black Jamaicans or black Haitians or black whomever. Okay, so that is what we have to understand. Now, Marie Antoinette is saying very true description of the racial stratification of Brazil. Thank you. Absolutely. Brazil is highly racially stratified, right? So they're part of the BRICS. Russia, the same thing. India, we know the whole caste system in India, don't we? Okay, the same thing with China. Well, to some extent, I've not heard in recent times, I must say, any negative experience coming out of China in terms of its racial stratification. It seems to me that China, even if it doesn't like black people, it believes in practicality. And if you as a black person go there and you have something to offer them, they will respect you. I've worked with them and I've seen where I'm black and they've respected me, right? Because if you come to the table with something to offer them and to build on their economy through education or economics or through politics, whatever, they will accept you for the most part. They're pragmatists. They're people who are based on that. But when you come on to Brazil, I'm not particularly sure about that. Nama says, we in the Caribbean are stuck where we are. Yes, we are stuck where we are because we have to now see if we can look at Marcus Garvey's economic vision. I think we like to look at other people's vision. So BRICS is another man's vision. It's not the Caribbean's vision. It did not come out of the Caribbean, right? BRICS came out of, I don't know, right? Maybe it even came out of the Western world, right? Who to tell? But the fact is that it's not a Caribbean perspective. It's not a Caribbean ideology, philosophy. And why are we moving away from our own domestic, economists like the same Marcus Garvey, even the one from Trinidad and Tobago, Eric Williams, right? Shouldn't we have these people and look at what they have said? Look at our own economists who understand our economic and social realities and our political realities to implementing things that will help us and not to be implementing policies that are foreign to us. But everything that is hyped, we like to go on board. And that is what I think. I think to me, BRICS is something that is hyped. If we look carefully at the entire system and we look culturally, we look historically, we look economically at how the countries in the BRICS countries are stratified, we would see that perhaps it's not going to work for us. And let nobody fool you, people like to dominate. People like to dominate. And even in countries like Jamaica, where you have the Chinese, right? The Chinese are there and they come there for business and other among other matters or other agendas that they have. But what do? They might be offering very low interest rates and on our loans, but at the end of the day, they are getting up what? Prime properties, prime land that we need to be able to develop. So eventually when they capture our land, then we are going to be what? Economically even poorer. One of the things that we have forgotten is that if our lands are taken away from us, as the Chinese are doing to a great extent, right? Our ports are taken away from us, then we don't own the land. No matter how many high-rise buildings you want to see. And again, we like the hype. We like to see superficially what we look at as development. But development has to be independence and sovereignty. If we don't have sovereignty, if we're not free to make our decisions, our own decisions, then we are not really free as we are suggesting. What about the divisions in the Caribbean? That's a very good point that the observer is actually making. One of the reasons why I'm also against these, what do you call them now, economic blocks, including in Europe. If you look at the European Union, they're also not doing well. I have spoken to many Italians and many other people coming out of the different European countries, and the European countries don't see themselves as a single people as we think. They don't, right? So the Italians are not seen the same light as the British, and the British as the Russians, and the Russians as the Germans. Okay, so what we have to understand is that, some of the economies prospered while many did not, and that's why it didn't work. The European Union didn't work. It's still there, but it's an unfair system. The same thing is going to happen to the Caribbean. It is an unfair system in terms of, let's look at Trinidad. When Jamaica decided to give up its what you call it now, its economic infrastructure, then it went to Trinidad. Okay, and Trinidad prospered for a number of years, and then they said to us, oh well, we're not the economic ATMs. We're not ATMs. We're not the ATMs of the Caribbean. So whenever you have these economic blocks, one or two countries, selective 2 or 3 countries, are going to dominate, and the others are going to be begging and looking. So I don't think that we are going to be, in this sense, economic blocks like CARICOM and the European Union. What I think we should do, if our world were free, was that people should be able to trade with whomever they want to trade with. So if you see something, for example, in the DR, in the Dominican Republic, and you think that you have a good product and you and that country can trade, then you should be able to do so freely. But what we have are these treaties that sometimes bind us, keep us into these economic blocks, which actually suffocate our economic growth and our development. And that is what I think. So I agree with you, the observer, that I don't think the economic agreements in the Caribbean. Secondly, as we've heard from what's his name, Fred Corbin, as he has already said to us many times, the CARICOM is controlled. CARICOM is controlled by the US. So a lot of what happens there is not necessarily things that we do of our free will. Okay, and there are some countries which are going to be ahead than some, and it is what it is. And when one country is stronger than the other, then they dominate. The stronger is going to dominate the weaker. And that's what happens in all countries. So when we blame the US, for example, for being this military power, if Jamaica, if Trinidad, if Guyana, if Barbados, if Canada had that military that the United States has, many of us would behave the same way. Because that is an intrinsic human quality, an intrinsic human characteristic is to dominate. And that is what I think that the US is doing. Now, what do you guys think about BRICS? I've been getting some comments that I want to hear more, and I'm happy that you're participating today. I like the participation, but I want to hear more from you in terms of what you think about BRICS. Do you think that BRICS is going to be the panacea to the problems that we face? Or do you think that there are going to be problems with BRICS? Now, there was something here that is interesting. I didn't carry my mouse, so it's very difficult for me to maneuver what's happening here on the computer. But what I want to say here is that we have to study the nations, Brazil, Russia, China, India, and South Africa. We must study them carefully. We must look at who controls them, who are the oligarchs in these countries, and will they be, what should I say now, sympathetic to our needs here in the Caribbean region. We have to do that. If we don't do that, then we're going to find ourselves just hyping everything. And be careful of what you see media hyping, whether it's the independent media or the mainstream media. Be careful of hype, because hype is just hype. We must get back into the reality. Another thing I've suggested, this, painting the world in black or white, okay, or, good or bad, is not a very good, thing to do, because at the end of the day, things are more nuanced and textured than we can imagine. So we need also to learn to look at things more deeply and say that beyond being black, what are the qualities of that person? Let me look at the pros and the cons and just don't, oh, because he's black, it means that he has my best interest at heart. Let us look at Obama. All right, when Obama came into power, we all thought that President Obama was going to change things for black people and for black nations, or for predominantly nations of color. Did he? No. All right, because just a color doesn't mean that he's going to, be sympathetic towards your needs. And these are the things that we're doing now. The observer is saying, I think there is going to be issues with BRICS because China wants to dominate, Russia wants to dominate, India wants to dominate. Brilliant point. And the same thing happened with the CARICOM, right? Remember when we were forming the West India Federation, the West Indian Federation, Trinidad wanted to dominate, Jamaica wanted to dominate, other countries wanted to dominate, and then eventually, because one could not dominate, they just said, okay, let's get rid of it, right? Because that is what it's all about. We all want to dominate. And that is what we have to, when you get yourself into these economic blocks and you form these treaties that are binding, they can be very dangerous. Because when you need to get out of it sometimes because you're not treated well, then these, it can be very, very tricky to do that. Would you say that our economies are deliberately sabotaged, segregated by these Europeans? I would say that, yeah. I think a lot of what we're seeing in the world is engineered or are engineered. Yeah, they are, because they want us to understand. When you look at what is happening in the US and with the black people there, look at how black people, before they became integrated into the United States society, before, the whole Martin Luther King era, black people were independent and had their, it was difficult, don't get me wrong, they weren't like wealthy billionaires and stuff like that, but they were living comfortably, they educated themselves, they had their independent businesses. And when they became now integrated, what happened? Then you had the war on poverty, and then you found that many black men went to prison, right? The laws were created for black men to reside in prison and to break up the black families. And what happened? You see that the erosion of black, culture and black civilization in the United States. So all of this integration that we're celebrating was fall. And we saw what, President Clinton did in 1995, and it was 1994 with the crime bill. All right. So we must understand that a lot of these policies, yes, are engineered. They just did not happen just through thin air. It happened deliberately to keep us in our places. Haiti is also another country where that is the same thing, because of the fact that it had acquired its independence in 1804. And, it said that it broke up the entire system of slavery throughout the world, not only in the Caribbean, but in the United States. And what happened, remember that Haiti also provided arms for the independence battles in South America. And that is what we're seeing in Venezuela. We're hearing them talk about the Bolivarian experiment, right? And right now, we as soon as Hugo Chavez came out of the block saying that he is a Bolivarian, and he believes in the Bolivarian project and agenda, the US was ready to depose him. And Maduro is continuing on that agenda. Now, we might not necessarily agree with everything Maduro and these people are doing, but what we are saying here, our theory, our perspective is that people should, if we're living in a free world, you should be able to craft and to create whatever economic, policies you want to be able to create for yourselves. Yeah, we are colonized. And Nehemiah, we are definitely colonized. And the observer is saying, and we must take into consideration the history of these BRICS countries share. For example, China has border and land disputes with India, likewise with Russia. Russia has issues with China, right, flooding its market, right, and that is true. Right. Remember now that during the Soviet bloc, during the Soviet Union, that China separated from the Soviet Union.